Politico reports that USA is preparing peace agreement which doesn't take into account the opinion of Ukraine and the European allies because of Russian pressure on the front line and the large-scale corruption scandal in Ukraine. And it's the reason why Zelensky will be forced to accept what will be offered by United States. How can you comment this, Adrian?
Well, first of all, I've seen reports and the reports are circumstantial. I think that there is no sign of diplomatic activity that involves the Secretary of State or his top team. And the reports that I've seen refer to Steve Witkoff, conversations that began with Kirill Dmitriev, who has been dismissed as a mere propagandist by Secretary Scott Bessent. So I just don't see how this is possible. Moreover, the U.S. hand is limited because there is also the European factor. So the idea that the United States can separately from Europe be negotiating a track towards a peace deal that affects the security of Europe fundamentally, not just Ukraine, without Europe being a part of it, is questionable in my view. And most importantly, when we don't see Mr. Stube or the major leaders of Europe rushing to Washington to try to prevent a bad deal, that's an indication that at least in NATO and in the EU, there are no alarm bells yet. Maybe these reports will change things in the following days, but unless we see some high-level European presence in Washington and discussions directly with the president and with the Secretary of State, I see this as spin. And I think some of that spin may have been encouraged by people like Mr. Yermak, the chief of the president's office, and Mr. Umerov, the secretary of the National Security Council, who are both now under de facto criminal suspicion and are out of the country. And it's unclear whether they're really negotiating to move a peace deal forward, or they're trying to figure out what to do in the face of this corruption crisis that has emerged in Ukraine. So I don't give this report a very high degree of certainty.
Mm-hmm. But another American journalists claim that United States and Russia have been secretly negotiating a new plan to end the war. What's new can be in this plan?
I don't believe that kind of negotiation is going on, because I don't believe Steve Witkoff is any longer a serious interlocutor in this. And again, I have not seen any credible evidence of high-level State Department or administration engagement. No sign of meetings, no sign of, maybe there is some secret diplomacy, and we haven't seen Lavrov for weeks, that there have been secret meetings between him and the Secretary of State, but I doubt it very much. So again, I don't think there is much happening, and I don't think there is much that can happen without Europe being integrally involved in it, and we don't see any evidence of Europe being integrally involved in any discussions of a peace deal. I mean, I do think that, it's clear, in my view, that Ukraine is going to lose more territory in the Donbas region, which will approach the maximalist demand of President Putin that he wants those territories. And it may actually happen as a result of longer-term battlefield trends that Russia achieves that kind of an aim. And we will then see whether Russia is exhausted and the cost is too high for Russia. I personally believe that Russia will not come to the negotiating table with a deal that is acceptable to Europe and to Ukraine until Ukraine gets the ability to use Western long-range weapons to reciprocally attack Russia's infrastructure, Russia's war-linked infrastructure, and that is slowly happening. And of course, Ukraine is developing its own weapons. But I think that the seizure and the deployment of the $200 billion in assets held in European banks, mainly in the Belgian banks, until those steps are taken, I see little motivation for Putin to come to the table and have a discussion about a peace treaty based along the current the current reality on the ground.
Mhm. But actually, if you don't believe that such a plan exists, why these publications in Western media appear?
Reporters are always looking for headlines. They get a little string of something, and clearly people like Mr. Witkoff are not out of the game. They have a relationship, but I've seen no indication of meetings that happened in a concrete place. Secret diplomacy is not this is not Henry Kissinger conducting secret diplomacy to end the Vietnam War. There is no need for secret diplomacy. There is only, we would see the movement of people moving towards negotiations. And there is no indication that the president often makes public things. The president cannot hold secrets. And if he sees that there is some real movement, I think we would have already heard some intimation of this, because the president always wants to be seen as ahead of the news stories. The fact that the president has not corroborated this in any specific way suggests to me that this is just reporters hunting for stories, and they're and looking for small evidence of trends. There is no, as far as I've seen in the reports, no sourced information from a high-ranking State Department official that says there is progress. There is progress towards a deal beyond the generic kinds of things that the White House always says when Mr. Trump tries to show himself as a major player in the diplomatic game.
Mm-hmm. But actually, at the same time, reporters are not ambiguous about this topic. For example, according to Axios, the plan consists of 28 points and is split to 4 categories: peace in Ukraine, security guarantees, security in Europe, and future US relations with Russia and Ukraine. But actually, in your opinion, what can be hidden in each category? But again, you said that you didn't believe in this plan, but let's imagine if United States have these 4 categories, what can be hidden inside?
I think those categories are clearly the ones on which a deal would be announced, and that's why I think President Trump believes that if there is the prospect of normalized and indeed intensified economic relations between the United States and Russia, that this will be a major incentive. I think the president has already spoken that he wants a peace deal along the lines of the current territorial divide, along the reality that is on the ground. And I think that those are probably reasonable positions from which a deal could be made, but I just don't see President Putin being drawn towards this, nor do I think that Europe nor Ukraine would ever agree to the recognition of Russia's military conquest of the territory of another sovereign state. So I don't think there is a deal, as I say, I don't think there is a deal to be had. I do think that there is a weakened President Zelensky, because of this corruption scandal, I think wants to, show that he is, at the center of events. So there is incentive for Ukraine to have these kinds of discussions. Ukraine has indicated its desire to have these discussions, and so I do not believe that there is credible evidence of a negotiated deal. There may be issues and points, and again, no one has sourced this document. This is secondary information, and we don't know whether some of it may have come from Dmitriev, some of it may have come from Mr. Witkoff, who is a completely incompetent public speaker who has spouted nonsense throughout this diplomatic process, who has promised gains. If he is the source, and Axios only referred to the meetings that were happening in Florida in late October as part of its story, if that is the source of this story, I don't think there's much to it other than the feeble actions of in my view, a discredited and failed diplomat.
But anyway, as we know, American and Ukrainian delegations are in Turkey now. And what do you think? What is the main topic? And
I
what
think
kind
it's,
of
I think the
negotiation?
main topic of that diplomacy is CYA, cover your ass. There's a scandal going on. So Mr. Umerov goes to Turkey and pretends to be negotiating over prisoner releases because he can't stand the heat and wants to see how deep are his problems back in Ukraine. Then he goes to Qatar to pursue those negotiations. Then he says he's coming to Florida, presumably to see his family one last time before he heads back to face the music. There, Mr. Yermak, who is under intense pressure for having used the security services to attack the criminal investigations of corruption in Ukraine, is looking to be a major player and a useful player. So he's trying to put his place into the process. So I'm not sure that there is a lot more going on than theatrics, but we will see. I could be wrong and these reports are right, but I would bet on that in a few weeks we will see that not much has come out of these stories.
I have one more question about Turkey. Why is U.S. delegation, which is related to negotiations with Ukraine in Turkey, led by Secretary of the Army Dan Driscoll, not Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff? What does this indicate?
Again, I'm not sure that these negotiations are, conclusive. It's unusual to have a Secretary of the Army engaged in such discussions. If these, and he isn't with Turkey, as far as I know, he's not meeting with his counterparts on the Russian side. So I don't see what, other than NATO-related matters and Turkey's role in NATO, what kind of possible negotiations there would be. But I do think that it is clear that Mr. Witkoff has not handled these negotiations well, and his non-presence may be the first signal that something is going on. But it's highly unusual for a Secretary of the Army whose job is focused on only one arm of the Ukrainian military, and who is not a diplomat, and who has not been designated as a major negotiator in this process, to play this role. But again, this is the Trump administration. Anything can happen. All hands on deck. The president often chooses odd interlocutors, and it's very possible that there is some kind of a mandate. But again, within the absence of, I don't consider this to be a diplomatic delegation. The Secretary of the Army has civilian control over just one branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, and I find it a branch that is not directly engaged in these conversations. So again, I don't see this as proof of the seriousness of this kind of negotiation track.
Actually, I still don't understand where Ukraine and Russia are able to find compromise. Russia wants to destroy Ukrainian statehood. Ukraine wants to save it. I understand how to bleed Russia dry through sanctions, weapon aid, and our long-range strikes on oil infrastructure. But what is compromise in peace negotiations can be now, in general? Your opinion?
I think you have to drive Russia to the table, and so Russia has two motives. One is to defang Ukraine and to either get rid of it as a state, or make it neutral and a non-factor. But it has also achieved some significant aims. It's occupied 20% of the territory. It has, cost a lot of infrastructure. It has driven. It's changed the demography of Ukraine for the long term, because, the expectations are that the population of Ukraine, even after the war, will probably be in the range of 32 million people, far less than the 37 to 40 million before the war, many of the refugees as time goes on. So it's created a smaller, if more well-armed and effective military rival. It has, and I think Russia will have to look at the long-term consequences of growth of the Russian economy and the consequences for Russia as a long-term significant power. Because if Russian growth, which is slowing dramatically now, Russian reserves have dried up, Russian inflation is out of control, the domestic economy, industrial production, purchases of goods are in stagnation, if not recession. All of this affects Russian long-term GDP. And the slower Russian GDP growth, the more it falls behind the United States, the more it becomes dependent on China and falls behind China. Russia is not participating in any significant way in the AI revolution. Russia is, and I think Russia's elite will face the same problem that the Soviet elite faced when it overextended, when it saw Russian Soviet growth slowing and the gap between them and the rest of the world, and particularly their adversaries, growing. And I think as Russia sees this, there may be more pressure on Mr. Putin to declare victory and move on. But I don't think that will happen until he sees that the West is committed, at least for the foreseeable future, for the next 5 or 6 years, to support Ukraine in its territorial defense and in its prosecution of the war, and that can be handled with the additional 200 to 250 billion in Russian hard currency reserves held in Western banks. That would represent roughly the annual commitment that the United States had previously been making, and would allow Europe to continue to meet all of the needs of Ukraine at the level that had been done before Trump shut off financing for the Ukrainian economy and for the Ukrainian military. The fact that the U.S. is willing to sell these weapons through Europe to Ukraine, and that Mr. Trump seems to be less fearful of the nuclear blackmail on the Russian side. We saw that in his reactions to Mr. Medvedev's ill thought out comments, and more recently in his desire to test nuclear weapons. I think that creates the circumstances which could bring Mr. Putin to the table.
Yeah, and actually, as far as American pressure is concerned, we know that Trump is going to sign a bill on sanctions against countries that trade with Russia. It would be the second part of so-called hell sanctions from Trump. To what consequences can it lead? Would it hit Russia painfully and Putin starts thinking about ceasefire or something else in context of the war?
As I say, I think there is a triad of issues. Number one, the capacity of Ukraine to attack Russian infrastructure in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and major cities in the heartland of Russia, not just within several hundred miles of the Ukrainian border, 300, 400, 500, 700 miles and further, which will require some Western weapons and obviously some technological movement in the Ukrainian arms production sector. The second is to see that the West has the resources. I think he's counting on the idea that if Putin is counting on the idea that Europe is will be spending too much money, and there are political movements that are emerging. All the political leaders, the British political leader is unpopular. The French political president is not going to be running again, and his political movement is not popular. So in those cases, I think he sees, and Merz as a coalition will be around for a few years, but again, it is losing popularity. So I think he feels that if Europe has a bigger burden to finance Ukraine's war effort, that this will lead to positive political developments for Russia, that anti-spending populists will come to power. But if Europe creatively uses these 200 billion in hard currency reserves that it has, it will not face those questions for 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years, and that is a signal to Putin to come to the bargaining table. And finally, the effect of sanctions and the effect of Ukraine hitting the Russian infrastructure and the Russian economy with with more direct attacks, especially on the military production and on the energy sector, which feeds the military production. I think that would be the triad of factors that would bring him to the table. And the fact that Trump is ready to support a couple of them and Europe is discussing supporting the other, I think is a positive sign that these three can come into place. And I think soon after all of these measures are implemented, Putin will be more inclined to go to the table, especially as the Russian elite recognizes that Russia's growth path and Russia's internal economic problems are on the rise.
I have one more question in terms of sanction, in terms of this the second step. Actually, we have discussed large-scale corruption scandal in Ukraine, but I would like you expand your thought. How Trump can use this corruption scandal in Ukraine, in Ukrainian energy, in a negotiation process? I mean, will it influence this negotiation process?
It could influence these, and that's why this is a signal to the president that he has to take steps to strengthen international confidence and domestic confidence in his government. That means he has to clean house in the presidential administration. He has to create a government, I would say a technocratic government of experts and people who enjoy the confidence, some people from within the current government, some people from outside, to show that this is a broad tent and to surrender his control of domestic economic policy to the parliament and to the new government, which he has not done. He's run a very centralized, semi-authoritarian, narrowly controlled, tightly controlled system, and he has to keep control of diplomacy and military and security affairs and make them absolutely part of his mandate, but leave the rest to a competent government. And in other words, create a broader coalition, not necessarily a political coalition, but a coalition that is acceptable to the broader opposition. We see that his polling numbers have been low. He was losing to General Zelensky in a future runoff 63 to 37. There are some reports that he's lost 40% of his base support as a result of the scandal, based on as yet unpublished, but reports of polls that are in the works of being completed. That means he's at maybe 25% support. Indeed, there was a poll recently that showed that only 25% of Ukrainians want him to stand for a second term. So that means he's a lame duck, and he has to compensate. A lame duck, he has to bring other ducklings into the pond, and they should all be swimming with him in a coordinated way. The good news about Ukraine is that even the most radical people in Ukraine, intelligent, radical, hardline people who are upset about Zelensky's government's recent performance. And by the way, there's no evidence that Zelensky directly participated in any corruption schemes. There is the evidence that he just had very bad judgment in the types of allies and friends he entrusted with key government positions. I think that if Zelensky takes these kinds of positive and concrete steps, it will strengthen his bargaining position. It will shore up morale in the country, and I think it will put Ukraine on the right track. I do think that European leaders are behaving calmly on these issues. The President Trump has not yet sought to make this an issue, but yes, this hurts. This does hurt Ukraine's interest. This does make the president weaker, which is one more reason why he has to share power and bring more people into the tent and maintain national unity. I don't think there will be mass protests to drive him out of power. I don't think there'll be pressure to hold early elections. But I think that the best way he can handle this and make Ukraine strengthen Ukraine's hand in negotiations is by creating a government of national trust with very competent people of impeccable reputation. And Ukraine has some of them. They are well known to the international community. And I think the ball is in his court. And I pray that he will go down this path.
Don't you believe that Trump can step back from his decision to impose new anti-Russian sanctions because of this Ukrainian scandal?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think he can step back because he does so all the time. He uses something as an incentive to drive a negotiation, then pulls back from it when he thinks there's an opening. Then, when he's disappointed, he doubles down and increases the sanctions. He is, as we know, not consistent on his day-to-day decisions. He's very impulsive. And this uncertainty, on the other hand, is one of the secrets of his occasional success, that people just don't know which way you will go. And it's better to solve something before something, something unexpected and even more harmful to another country's interests may happen. So his unpredictability can go both ways, and I think we may see it yet go both ways until over the course of the months, until we come to a potential peace deal.
By the way, don't you think that Russians are scamming Trump in terms of negotiations in general, and they are not ready for these negotiations at all?
Yeah, I mean, Russia is not ready for a serious peace deal, and I think but it either happens or it doesn't happen. And eventually, the Russians are trying to drag this out. They want to make more advances on the front. They don't want these sanctions to be imposed, so they're trying to string Trump along. And unfortunately, he has fallen for this many times. I mean, you can remember this Anchorage, Alaska summit. At the Anchorage, Alaska summit, it lasted for like an hour and 15 minutes. It was supposed to be a long thing. They didn't even have lunch together. The atmosphere was bad. Trump came out of it and celebrated the grand successes. He will continue to play this kind of a game where everything that he is doing is leading to progress and leading to success. There's a lot of hype in his presidency. There are some accomplishments. There's a lot of hype and there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think the Russians play on this, but I think that, he's been deeply disappointed that Putin has not been willing to come to a deal. So I think his view of Putin has shifted in recent months to a more realistic view. I think that the less Mr. Witkoff is involved, the less there is the flow of disinformation and this odious person, Kirill Dmitriev, this two-bit propagandist who is trying, to entice Trump with promises of a golden age of economic relations and wealth creation in Russia, when we know that almost no U.S. businesses are ready to go under the current state of the rule of law in Russia and the kind of unpredictability with Mr. Putin's mad and insane warmongering, that given all those uncertainties, there will not be a flow of private capital into Russia, even if sanctions were lifted. There will be circumspection and fear, and so many companies have gotten burned on the Russian market over the course of the years. It's a highly corrupt society and a much more corrupt, systematically and systemically corrupt society than Ukraine. And the most important thing about Ukraine, that the answer to Mr. Trump's maybe and critics' use of, pointing to the corruption scandal, is that the corruption scandal is there because the institutions that track corruption have been functioning, and the force of people power and civic mobilization has also contributed to this. And that's what Ukraine is in the end. It's people, and it's the fact that there are some democratic institutions and that there are some effectively functioning criminal justice institutions. Mm-hmm. That is Ukraine's biggest calling card, much more so than the heroism of President Zelensky. It's the heroism of the people who have time and again stood for an end to corruption, a movement towards the West, and the defense of their democracy. They've done it over almost 35 years of independence.
Adrian, I have the last question for you, and I would like to ask you, be sincere about it. What American establishment says behind the scenes about Ukrainian future?
I don't think there is anyone in the United States that has a defeatist in the establishment, a defeatist view of Ukraine. I think that there is an exaggeration. The small gains that Russia has made territorially, inching its way at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dead and maimed, is not a sign of some rapid breakdown in the Ukrainian system. I think the Ukrainian system has incredible resilience. It showed that resilience in the first days of the war, and it will be showing its resilience in the coming weeks. I just hope that President Zelensky moves quickly to consolidate stability within the state. It will happen eventually. It will happen maybe even without him, through the actions of the parliament, through the actions of external and internal pressure. It would be much better if he went ahead of the curve and preempted some of that and came to a quick solution. So I think Ukraine has shown remarkable resilience. I don't think there's anyone betting on Ukraine not persisting and not surviving and not thriving eventually. Partly, I think the big difference is that now there is investment in joint ventures in Ukrainian military production, which is much more efficient use of the dollar and bang for the buck, as they say, literally. And that, as Denmark is showing, and other European companies are showing, and there's an interest on the part of American investors to collaborate with Ukrainian defense production and Ukrainian defense and tech and defense innovation. And I think that will also lead to a much more effective use of the resources that the West and Europe in particular have to give to Ukraine. So I think all that is understood by the US elite. And I think that there is no, I don't think there's this defeatism. There isn't, all is lost and we have to run to a deal. We don't see it from the part of European leaders. I haven't really seen it yet on the part of the United States. Yes, there are the traditional, Tucker Carlsons and the isolationists, but it's clear that Mr. Trump is no isolationist and is willing to deeply engage himself in political processes and diplomatic processes to resolve international issues. And I think he's found a formula for, making sure that Ukraine persists and survives without it being at the cost of the American taxpayer. And that also means that there's I think he has less interest in pressuring Ukraine and maybe more interest in pressuring Russia.
Adrian, thank you very much for this interview. I was glad to see and hear from you, and have a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.